Brock Purdy apparently the weird thing is when this clip first made the rounds, it was actually a couple days before I felt like it got all the 49er content creators that I saw talked about it. And people on Twitter were saying like, oh, they thought that it was probably fake, just the way that he talked about Brock Purdy maybe being a little bit more boastful within his answer. But in my opinion, I don't think like a media member that because doesn't he call games? That's why they had that little meeting. They had it before not the Ravens game, before the Rams game that just happened.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
and
So
he's
I don't
called
think
plenty of Niners games, and he's also a former
yeah.
player for Mike Shanahan.
So I don't think someone like that would like make stuff up. But were you surprised to hear Brock Purdy? He's been asked that question. The question like, does he consider himself a game manager within 49er press conferences? And he's kind of always had more of an aw shucks attitude towards it. Kind of like I'm gonna let my play speak for itself. I'm gonna let maybe the cards unfold at the end of maybe I don't know if when he says it, he's like at the end of it all. So I don't know if he means like when I win the Super Bowl this year, or if he just means at the end of my career. We're kind of gonna find that out. But I've always really respected the way that he's answered that question in press conferences. And do you see him telling Mark
Schlereth.
Schlereth, maybe in a more boastful way that anyone who thinks he's a game manager doesn't watch the film and that he has a bit of gunslinger in him, and that maybe that would be a disrespectful thing to call him. Do you find that shocking? Do you think that maybe anyone who's gotten the NFL has that sort of confidence about them? How did you feel when you heard? I don't know if you heard the podcast clip where he was
Yeah.
talking about it, but how did you feel
So
about that?
my reaction to what he said specifically, is that what you're asking?
Yeah, like just were you surprised that maybe the tone seemed different?
Yeah,
Or
I
do you
was.
think Mark Schlereth was making that up? Because everyone, I felt like their initial take was this is not true, and now I feel like people are taking it more seriously, and it does seem like a weird thing for someone, that has a credit within the community to lie about. It's not like a random person on Twitter, it's
Yeah,
someone
I
who.
saw he clearly didn't lie about it because I saw the clip of Brock Purdy saying it. It was a video of him and Mark Schlereth that I saw.
Oh, I saw
So
one where Mark Schlereth was just like reiterating what he said.
oh no, I saw a video of the two of them talking. Maybe I didn't see it because I haven't been able
Oh.
to be on my phone as much as I usually am the last week or so, but for sure I thought I saw a video clip. Either way, yeah, I was surprised that he took that tone for sure. Um when you look at, Brock Purdy and how typically NFL quarterbacks talk, they say a whole lot of nothing, even if they truly believe something else. And so I was surprised that he actually took that moment to say what he believes and say what's in his head. I liked that confidence from him. I liked that he was honest and had a human moment in front of the media where he showed what he truly feels about what people say about him. The thing I have is I've never understood how game manager is necessarily an insult of a quarterback. I think for Brock Purdy, game manager now all of a sudden brings up, I don't want to call it dink and dunk because then it brings up a different connotation within the community, but that's the kind of connotation I guess that exists with game manager. Like I remember Alex Smith in
Yeah.
2011 would get that description a
People
lot
had
about
that
him.
for Brady, even though Brady like
Yeah,
won Super
yeah.
Bowl for like
But
far into his career.
yeah, and I would argue that being a game manager is essential. Every quarterback needs to be a good game manager.
Yeah, like just
50%,
baseline.
60% of the game is being able to manage it as a quarterback, making the correct decisions at the right time. So I don't necessarily find those words as derogatory, but I understand the connotation of what they mean within that context. And that's what he's responding to. And I agree with what he had to say about that. If you feel like he's not aggressive and he doesn't take chances, I think you can
Yeah.
watch the film and see the opposite. And I would tend to say I find him to be more reckless, actually, and a little bit more like for his physical gifts, he plays with an insane amount of confidence and an insane amount of recklessness in terms of what he attempts, the throws he attempts, the off schedule plays he attempts. And I would say none of those things indicate that he's a conservative quarterback, which is, I think, really what we're responding to when people say game manager, and which is why I brought up the dink and dunk. But that
Yeah.
description has been a little bit overblown because of who said it originally last year and how people have run with that narrative. It's not necessarily talked about the right way. And so I don't want to turn this into a Ryan said that when he did, because he had his reasons for when he said that. What I mean is the phrase dink and
Purdy
dunk, what it
also has
means
like for the
doesn't
Ryan, Brock
apply to
Purdy
how
has
he's
also
playing
like
this
kind of
year.
said that he didn't throw the ball down the field that much last year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, 100%.
And this year he totally has. But yeah, just for the ding and dunk, like quickly. Like I think that it was a fair comment to be made when it was made.
Yeah,
And doesn't
regardless,
necessarily
I
need to
think
be like what he is now
yeah,
or
and regardless
representative
of
of his
that,
career style.
I think mainly it's the phrase, what it means, because I think that dink and dunk isn't just a phrase typically used about quarterbacks that don't throw the ball down the field. It's of quarterbacks who simply can't. Like you take like Jake Fromm, for example. Like when he came out of college, you would think that's a dink and dunk quarterback. Matt Barkley, when he came out of college, just guys that are physically incapable of being anything beyond just guys who pat the ball underneath. And so I think that's where that phrase got taken. It's slightly out of context. And I think that definition for that phrase is what game manager is also referring to. And neither of those things apply to Brock Purdy.
It's weird. Yeah, I like that you talked about the connotation of the term because it is weird that it is such like a necessary fundamental step for all quarterbacks to have that. But I remember when Cam Newton made his game changer, game manager comments, Kurt Warner came out and talked about how he used to be really offended by those types of accusations. So it does seem to be something within quarterbacks who are, determined to maybe be the best or make more with their career. Um, they do seem to take offense to that instead of it being a sort of descriptor of style. It seems to be more about like, oh, you're like fundamentally less
It's
talented
because
than this,
It's because of the context it's typically presented in, right? And I think the Cam Newton one was taken completely extra out of context simply because of the source that delivered that news. I think Cam Newton has a funny relationship with fans and media that then contributes to anything he says getting blown out of proportion to attacking his career in ways like,
yeah.
man, this is the year of third string quarterbacks coming out of nowhere and becoming media superstars. And the guy that really gets attacked personally for his career is the former MVP that makes one comment. It was a wild thing for me to
Yeah.
comprehend. But besides that point, I think it's the context. I remember there used to be a guy on NFL Network named Jamie Dukes. And the reason I referenced this phrase to him is because I remember in 2011 when people would talk about Alex Smith, who at the time was a very conservative quarterback. That was his bounce back year, the first year with Harbaugh. He always referred to him as a game manager. And all of a sudden, like, yes, Alex Smith was managing the game, but he wasn't managing the game in the maximum way that you can manage a game to win,
Like
right? Because
Brock optimizes.
being aggressive is part of managing a game well. And if you're
Yeah.
conservative every time and you're not taking opportunities on third down, you need to convert third downs to win football games. And so that's where I think that the conversation is probably a tad bit more nuanced, but I think it gets degraded to this simply because of the context that game managers constantly use and does feel derogatory. But for it doesn't really apply definition wise to Brock Purdy. And in fact, I would say if we're just saying game manager and saying what game means and what manager means, I would say Brock Purdy does represent that. And that's not an insult. He does manage the game extremely well. And that's important.
I like and I agree. I think he takes calculated risks. I think maybe he has confidence in himself to make a play that's not there. I often think about the Ayuk play that it was Kyle Shanahan in the post game. I'm blanking on what game it was on, but
The
a couple of
Seattle
games
game.
ago. Yeah, where the no yes play.
Yeah.
And he came back in that press conference after that play turned out well and was like, I'm not going to attempt that play again because I know that was bad. And I remember thinking he's going to attempt that play again because he believes that he can make that throw. And then in the Ravens game, he attempted a similar throw and it got intercepted. But my thought process when taking in that information and maybe like having that thought to myself that like Brock Purdy is the type of quarterback that would make that play, made me think of the Alex Smith years. And I kind of, as a fan, would rather have a quarterback that believes he can make that play and attempts to make that play, even if sometimes it gets you in trouble, because at least you know he's going to take the opportunity to potentially get more out of an offense than you would if you were playing it safe. I
No,
don't know
I
if that
agree with
makes
you.
complete
I
sense.
agree with you. That makes total sense.
Yeah. And when you were like saying manager, it made me think of John Lynch and like how if you were always just drafting the safe guy instead of maybe sometimes going after the guy with talent, or if when you were bringing players in, you're not going to bring in Christian McCaffrey because Christian McCaffrey has a history with injuries and he takes so many draft picks. And why would you take that chance when potentially, that could ruin your franchise and set you back? And they continue it. I mean, even the Trey Lance trade was like a giant swing and a miss, but you have to miss some in order to then make the Christian McCaffrey one. And you can't let your misses or your interceptions change the style of manager you are. And I just thought that was interesting. When you were kind of breaking down the manager word itself, I was like, that doesn't even just apply to quarterbacks. That applies to maybe the style of organization that they've built under the like Kyle Shanahan regime as a whole, which I kind of like.
Yeah, 100%.